BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, the fight over inheritance tax on farms continues despite draft legislation showing the government isn't backing down. First, though, you don't need me to tell you that this has been a year when the weather pendulum has swung from one extreme to another. A record-breaking wet winter has been followed by a record-breaking dry spring and early summer in many parts of the UK, with 3 heatwaves thrown in for good measure. So, managing water has become a huge challenge for farmers, and that's what we're exploring on the programme this week. Let's start by hearing from Dr. Doug Wilson, Science Director of the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology.
We've currently experienced the driest May to June period in England since 1893. Rivers are exceptionally low across eastern Scotland, eastern England, quite a lot of central and southern England as well. And in some cases we've actually seen river levels, for example, in the River Derwent in Yorkshire, below those experienced in 1976, which, for those old enough to remember it, was the real extreme event.
It's not that long ago that we could have been talking about having too much rain when we saw so much flooding and, again, crops sort of drowned, really, in the fields. To what extent are the extremes becoming more extreme?
I think this is exactly in line with what we'd expect to see under changing climate. So, in the winters, we're expecting to see them being wetter as well as warmer, and in the summer, drier and hotter. This swing often very rapidly from very dry to very wet conditions and back again is something that we do recognise, and something I think we'll all have to find out a way of accommodating and working with.
Is that what we have to do, accommodate? Because we've talked a lot on this programme about solutions to both flooding and drought, holding more water in the soil, slowing down river flow, that sort of thing. Can they make enough difference?
They can make some difference. One of the key things is, as you say, how you actually hold water within catchments, and that's good both in terms of managing floods and droughts. We'll still have these very extreme events, so it will help somehow. But I think the other bit is actually how do we become much more resilient to those changes? Looking at how we manage the land, increasing the organic matter, but also looking at different crops as well, maybe more deep-rooted plants, those that are more tolerant to droughts as well. Just as all that has all got to be part of this overall approach.
Do you think we take water seriously enough? We're so used to it being pretty wet.
We do take it seriously, but I think what's different now is that real shift from the extremes, as we mentioned before. I think also our approach to water management generally has really got to take account of these big changes, both in terms of agriculture, but also more widely, how do we use water for drinking, how to use it for industry, how to use it for recreation, and also for the environment as well. There are lots and lots of different factors that need water. And I think one of the things we really need to think around is how do we manage those future needs, and how do we achieve that balance between all those demands.
Dr. Doug Wilson there from the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. More on water management all week. Now, Lough Neagh, it's the largest lake in Britain and the island of Ireland. It supplies about 40% of Northern Ireland's drinking water. And as we've reported, it's also been beset with water pollution problems over recent years, affecting wildlife and the loch's traditional eel fishery. This season, the fishermen have been forced to cancel eel fishing entirely after early catches didn't meet the standard needed for the market. One of the factors they blame is water quality. Gary McAlane, a 7th-generation eel fisherman, told the BBC what it means to cancel the season.
It's unprecedented for our fishing season to close down effectively. Isn't it worrying, isn't it devastating to think that a creature that makes its way 3,000 miles from the Sargasso Sea to spend out its time here with us, and we're lucky enough for that to be the case, that this is how we treat it. That's not good enough.
BBC Northern Ireland environment correspondent Louise Cullen has been covering this. I asked her how the water quality issues have forced fishermen to take this decision.
The eel travels a long distance across the Atlantic Ocean from the Sargasso Sea before it gets to Lough Neagh, so there could be many things affecting those elvers on the way. But when they get here, they spend several years in the depths of Lough Neagh, and they feed there on the larvae of the Lough Neagh fly, the chironomid. But the fly population dipped a couple of years ago, and of course we've had the blue-green algal crisis really starting in 2023. Pollution in the water is one of the key elements for algae, and the bulk of the excess nutrient in Lough Neagh comes from agriculture, although wastewater, industrial leaks and septic tank seepage also play a part. But fishermen believe that what's happened this year is the outworkings of all those elements.
Water quality and the impact that farming might have on it has become a really hot topic in Northern Ireland because more stringent measures to control the runoff from farms, updating the Nutrient Action Programme, as it's called, are potentially on the way, which has got everybody talking.
Absolutely. The Nutrient Action Programme, the NAP as we all call it. Now, this latest version of the NAP is already several years overdue. It makes proposals like making specialist slurry equipment mandatory by 2030, changing slurry spreading limits so that more of the intensive farms, bigger farms, will have to seek a derogation for slurry, and planting buffer zones to reduce pollution. Now, as you say, this has all proved very contentious, very controversial. Jason Rankin is from the industry body AgriSearch. They've produced a report on behalf of the Ulster Farmers Union, and it says that the proposals as they stand could have a severe potential economic impact of just over £1.5 billion.
We all recognise that water quality is absolutely something that has to be addressed. I think what concerns us is the scale and the speed at which they plan to push this on. The consultation wasn't really forewarned in advance to stakeholders. We would have much preferred to see DAERA take a much more collaborative approach. We believe there are win-wins that we can go, and there are ways to improve our water quality without threatening the biggest sector in the Northern Ireland economy and undermining our food security.
Jason Rankin there. But Louise, given the extent of the problems they've had in Lough Neagh with water quality, is change inevitable, really, for farmers in Northern Ireland?
Well, the bottom line is that having a Nutrients Action Programme is a legal requirement. They have been living with it for nearly 2 decades, and one way or another there will be a new one in place next year. But the thing is, farmers have done exactly what the 2012 Going for Growth policy encouraged them to do. They've increased productivity. They've done that by building bigger sheds, by taking on more livestock and borrowing, sometimes heavily, to pay for it. Tim Morrow farms in County Down. He's a dairy farmer. He doesn't farm intensively. He's adapted his farming methods, planting multi-species swards and reed beds and so on. But he can understand why there's been this backlash against this consultation.
If you have something that's working, it's very hard to change. I don't think farmers are adverse to change as long as they're given advance notice. If there was a programme saying over the next 5 to 10 years, you're required to be doing this, you could have half of your farm in mixed species swards instead of just grass only. We're all, as farmers, we're very aware that we're not doing all the polluting.
Farmer Tim Morrow ending that report from BBC Northern Ireland's environment correspondent Louise Cullen. The National Farmers Union says the fight over inheritance tax on farms is not over, despite the publication of draft legislation which shows the government isn't backing down. Campaigners against the re-imposition of the tax, which will be levied at 20% on assets over £1 million from April next year, had hoped that the government would at least change aspects of the policy, but that hasn't happened. As you'll no doubt be aware, there have been protests around the country about this issue. Farmers say it'll put families out of business, but the government argues that it's a fair tax, which the majority of farm businesses either won't be liable for or can plan for. Elsa Littlewood is a tax partner at accounting and advisory firm BDO. Are you seeing now farming businesses planning different ways of getting through this?
Absolutely. So some business owners, some farm owners are choosing to transfer assets to their spouses now during their lifetime so that they both hold at least £1 million worth of assets when they pass away. Others are setting up trusts to hold the assets, and some clients are dealing with this issue through their wills. So, for example, Mrs. Farmer could leave the first £1 million of farm assets to her children on her death, with the remaining going to Mr. Farmer, so that when he dies, he will be able to utilise a further £1 million pounds of allowance. So there are various ways of achieving this. And I think the real key takeaway is to make sure you're speaking to your professional advisors, and they can help you understand what the changes mean for you right as things stand right now, and whether you can optimise your position by making alterations to where you hold assets now or how they're dealt with in your will.
Tax advisor Elsa Littlewood. I asked the president of the National Farmers Union, Tom Bradshaw, if he accepted that the NFU's lobbying to change the government's inheritance tax proposals had failed.
No, we would obviously have liked to have seen change contained within the draft legislation, but unfortunately it's exactly as it was proposed. But this doesn't mean we can give up, Charlotte. I mean, this week I've had the agricultural chaplain for Suffolk in touch with me twice, really concerned about the calls that he's receiving in from members of the agricultural community that are under a huge amount of personal pressure. And he's just saying, you've got to keep going, Tom. You can't possibly give up yet.
Does that mean you're going to plan more protests?
To begin with, we're going to continue to try and work with backbenchers. Now we've got the draft legislation, we can try and prepare amendments with them that could be proposed in the House that maybe can be taken to a vote. Now, clearly, we need to get a significant amount of Labour support to try and force through an amendment. But we still hope that it's not too late for the government to recognise that they can't possibly go ahead with a policy which is creating the human impact that this policy is going to on the elderly and on those that are terminally ill that have no ability to plan. And I hope that in the end, the government will recognise they need to amend the policy.
Obviously, the government argues that this is fair. And let's be honest, landowners with assets over £1 million are not exactly Labour heartland, are they? So realistically, wouldn't it be better to accept this and start working out how businesses can cope?
Well, those that don't expect to live for 1 or 2 years, Charlotte, have this awful window before April 2026. And that is not an acceptable position for anybody. It doesn't feel like it's a Labour policy which it doesn't look after the people element of our community. And we've put forward a really sensible solution to this with the rest of the farming industry, saying tax us if our children sell the farm, tax them at the full 40% at that point in time. But while the business assets are there to produce this country's food, taxing them as though they're personal wealth is just completely wrong.
NFU President Tom Bradshaw. And that's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Sarah Swadling, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.